The night air over the Crimson Moon Kingdom smelled of pine and smoke, and every wolf in the territory had gathered beneath the tall stone arches of the mating ceremony grounds. Torches lined the path, and the moon hung fat and silver above the trees, casting pale light over hundreds of waiting faces. This was the night every unmated wolf dreamed of, the night the bond might reveal itself and change a life forever. Illyra Voss stood at the very back of the crowd, exactly where an Omega was expected to stand. She was small, quiet, and used to being overlooked. Her packmates rarely spoke to her, unless they needed something done, and even then, they spoke like she was furniture that happened to answer back. She had stopped expecting anything from ceremonies like this one. She had learned, long ago, that hope was a luxury Omegas could not afford. Alpha King Cale Ashford stood at the front, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced boredom of a man who had done this every year and expected nothing new. He was the strongest alpha the kingdom had seen in 3 generations, undefeated in every challenge, feared by rivals and worshipped by his own pack. He did not believe in fate, he believed in strength, and strength was something an Omega, by definition, did not have. Then the wind shifted. It carried her scent across the grounds, faint but unmistakable, like rain on warm stone. Cale's whole body went still. His wolf, usually silent and controlled, surged forward inside him with a force he had never felt before. His eyes found her instantly, as though some invisible thread had pulled his gaze straight to the back of the crowd, straight to the small woman in the plain gray dress, who was staring at him with wide, startled eyes. The bond had chosen. A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the crowd as people realized what was happening. An Omega. The Alpha King's mate was an Omega. Cale felt the recognition settle into his chest, like a stone dropped into still water, and for one heartbeat, something in him softened. Then he remembered who was watching. His council stood just behind him, led by his uncle, Magnus, a man who had spent years arranging a match between Cale and Seraphine, the daughter of a neighboring Alpha family, with old power and older money. Losing that alliance would weaken the kingdom's borders, Magnus had warned him more than once. A king needed a queen who could stand beside him in battle, not one who trembled at the back of a crowd. Cale looked at Illyra one more time. She had taken a small step forward, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, like some small, foolish part of her believed this moment might actually be good to her. He crushed that hope without hesitation. "I reject the bond," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent grounds. "I will not have an Omega as my Luna." The words landed like a blow. Illyra felt her knees weaken, and she pressed a hand against the cold stone beside her to keep from falling. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some in shock, some in cruel satisfaction, because there were always those eager to see an Omega humbled in public. Magnus nodded in approval. Seraphine, watching from the front row, allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. Illyra did not cry, not there, not in front of them. She turned and walked away from the ceremony grounds with her back straight, though everyone could see how hard her hands were shaking. She did not get far before Cale's betas caught up with her, following the tradition that said a rejected mate could not simply stay in the Packlands as though nothing had happened. She was Omega, an unwanted complication now, and the council wanted her gone before sunrise. They left her at the edge of the Ashwood Forest, a place spoken of only in warnings, where the trees grew too close together and the old magic of the land was said to still linger from a time before the kingdoms were drawn on any map. No one expected her to survive the night. Illyra did not know how long she walked before her legs finally gave out. She collapsed at the base of an ancient oak, her chest aching from more than exhaustion, and let the tears come at last, silent and bitter, soaking into the moss beneath her. She did not pray for anyone to come. She simply waited for the forest to decide what to do with her. It was not the forest that found her. It was an old woman named Brenna, leader of a small, hidden pack of rogues who had lived beyond the kingdom's borders for decades. Wolves, who had been cast out themselves for one reason or another and had built a quiet life far from alpha politics. Brenna knelt beside Illyra in the moonlight and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You smell like the old blood," she said softly. "I have not smelled that in a very long time." Illyra, too tired and too broken to be afraid, only stared up at her. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," Brenna said, helping her to her feet, "that whoever rejected you tonight made the greatest mistake of his life." The rogue pack took her in without asking for anything in return, which was, in itself, something Elira had never experienced. They fed her, gave her a place to sleep, and did not treat her rank as a mark of shame. Slowly, over the weeks that followed, Elira began to heal, though the wound of that night in front of the ceremony grounds did not fade so easily. It was Brenna who first noticed the strangeness in her. Elira could sense the moods of every wolf in the small camp before they spoke a single word. When a young pup fell and scraped his knee badly enough to draw blood, Elira knelt beside him without thinking, pressed her palm to the wound, and watched in stunned silence as the skin knit itself closed beneath her hand. The pup stopped crying and stared up at her like she had performed real magic, because in every way that mattered, she had. Brenna gathered the old texts the rogue pack had kept hidden for generations, worn leather books filled with stories the kingdoms had long dismissed as myth. They spoke of the first Luna, a wolf born before packs had kings and queens at all, whose blood carried the power to heal, to unite, and to command any wolf regardless of rank, because in her time, rank had not yet been invented as a cage. That bloodline was thought lost, Brenna told her one evening by the fire. But it seems it was only sleeping, and it appears it chose you. Elira did not become powerful overnight. It took months of training beneath Brenna's watchful eye, of learning to control the strange new instincts rising inside her, of pushing her body and her wolf past every limit she had once believed defined her. There were nights she wanted to give up, nights the memory of Kale's voice in front of the whole kingdom nearly broke her all over again. But each time, she remembered the small, quiet strength of the rogue pack that had given her shelter without asking anything of her, and she kept going, not for revenge, but because for the first time in her life, she had something worth becoming strong for. By the time a full year had passed, Elira could shift into a form larger and more radiant than any alpha the rogue pack had ever seen, her fur pale as moonlight, her presence enough to calm the most anxious wolf in the camp with a single look. Word began to spread beyond the borders of the Ashwood, carried by traveling wolves and cautious merchants, of a mysterious silver-eyed leader, uniting scattered rogue packs and defending villages the kingdoms had abandoned to bandits and worse. They called her the Rogue Luna, though none of them knew her true name. Back in the Crimson Moon Kingdom, Kale's world had not remained steady in her absence. The alliance with Seraphine's family had soured within months, her father pulling support the moment a rival kingdom began testing the Crimson Moon borders, sensing weakness in a king who had let his own council make his choices for him. Magnus, once so certain of his plans, found himself with no answers as raiding parties grew bolder and the kingdom's resources stretched thin. Kale told himself often that he did not think of her. He told himself the ache that settled into his chest some nights was simply the price of leadership, the weight of decisions he had made for the good of his people. But every full moon, when the mate bond pulled at something deep and wordless inside him, he knew exactly what it was, and he hated himself a little more each time. The rival kingdom finally struck in early spring, a coordinated attack against 3 border villages in a single night. Kale rode out with his strongest warriors, but they arrived to find the invaders already scattered, and the village guarded by wolves he did not recognize, led by a woman with silver-white fur and eyes like moonlight on water. She stood at the village gates as his warriors slowed their horses, and when she shifted back into her human form, Kale felt the ground tilt beneath him. Elira. She did not run to him, and she did not look away either. She simply watched him with the calm, steady gaze of someone who had built an entire life without needing his approval to do it. "Alpha King," she said, her voice even. "Your border villages needed help. We were closer." Kale dismounted slowly, his warriors falling silent around him, none of them daring to speak as their king stood before the legendary Rogue Luna and realized, all at once, exactly who she had been all along. "I did not know," he said quietly. "I did not know it was you." Elira's expression did not soften. "Would it have mattered?" she asked, "if you had?" He had no answer that would not sound hollow, so he offered none. Instead, He did something the old Kale never would have done. He knelt, right there in front of his own warriors, in front of the villagers watching from broken doorways, and admitted, out loud, that he had been wrong. Illyra did not forgive him in that moment, and she made that clear. But she also did not turn him away, because the threat at the border was not finished, and the people in that village still needed protection more than she needed to settle old scores. They worked together through the following weeks, her rogue packs and his warriors combining forces to push back the invasion, and slowly, carefully, something began to shift between them that was not quite trust, not yet, but was no longer only pain either. The final battle came at the edge of the Ashwood, where the rival kingdom made its last desperate push before the summer solstice, hoping to catch the Crimson Moon forces unprepared. It was Illyra's forces who turned the tide, her healing touch keeping fallen warriors alive on the field, her command uniting wolves from a dozen different packs who had never fought side by side before that night. Kale fought beside her, not in front of her, not issuing orders over her, but beside her, as an equal for the first time since the bond had chosen them both. When the invaders finally retreated, the kingdom erupted into a celebration, unlike anything the Crimson Moon lands had seen in generations. Not for a king's victory alone, but for the woman who had saved villages he had failed to protect, who had built an army out of the very wolves the kingdoms had discarded. The old council, Magnus included, knelt before her within the week, the ancient texts finally confirmed by elders too old to deny what stood plainly in front of them. The bloodline of the first Luna had returned, and it had chosen, of all people, the Omega they had once cast out into the forest to die. Kale found her the night before the formal ceremony, standing alone at the edge of the training grounds where the mate bond had first pulled them together the year before. He did not kneel this time. He simply stood beside her, close enough to feel the quiet hum of the bond between them, and offered his hand, not as a king granting favor to someone beneath him, but as a man asking, honestly, if she might ever choose him the way he should have chosen her from the very beginning. Illyra looked at his hand for a long moment before she looked up at his face. "I am not the same wolf you rejected," she said. "I know," he answered. "That is why I am asking, not assuming." She took his hand. The following night, beneath the same stone arches where she had once been humiliated in front of the entire kingdom, Illyra Voss stood as Luna, not because an alpha had chosen her, but because she had risen, on her own strength, past every limit anyone had ever tried to place on her. The torches burned just as bright, the moon hung just as full and silver above the trees, but this time, when she looked out over the crowd, no one dared to look away, and no one ever called her weak again.